So, good morning, everyone. My name is Shu Yi Chu, and I'm a member of Impact Net Zero, an organization that focuses on helping Canadians adopt low carbon lifestyle. Welcome to our interview series. I'm very honored to be joined by Tim Grant today, the chair of the Net Zero Committee and Project at Harborne Village Residents Association. Hi, Tim.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning. So Harborne Village, as some of you are very well aware of, it's just west of University of Toronto, with Bloor Street to the west, College to the south, Spadina to the east, and Bathurst to the west. To the west, right? Yes. And for the benefit of everyone, a resident association is sort of a group of people, former group of people who comes together to address some of the concerns of the local neighborhood. So as a resident of Harborne Village myself, I was very interested in, what my neighborhood is doing to address climate change. So maybe Tim, we'll start by having you tell us a little bit about the Net Zero project, how it came about and its goals and what it's trying to achieve.
Sure, happy to do that. Yeah, just to back up a little bit, the Harvard Village Residents Association, or HVRA for short, is probably one of the most active in the city. And when I joined the board, I'm going to say almost 20 years ago, and a few years later became its chair for a 7-year period. Um, what really intrigued me when I first joined was that this was a group that not only cared about improving the quality of life for people living in the neighborhood, but also had a larger eye to what else was happening in the city and how could a local community, what projects could we take on that would also have a spillover effect or create good precedents for the wider city. So that's what made it a very interesting uh, organization to get involved with. And while I was on the board prior to being the chair, we did several projects related to climate change, one of which was called the Downtown West Solar Energy Project about 15 years ago. And uh, we created a community solar project that enabled I think it was about 60, 70 households to put very expensive solar panels on their rooftops. But it was a way to get things started. And a few years later, we did the HERO project, which HERO stood for Home Energy Retrofit Opportunities. And ironically, one of the bulk purchases that we negotiated, the discounts was for gas furnaces, high efficiency gas furnaces, which of course our current project is trying to help people take out of their houses. Um, so that's a bit of background. And I've been a political candidate way too often in provincial and federal elections. And at the tail end of one of the federal elections, some of the board came to me and said, "We have a climate project. Would you be interested?" And so 2 years in, I've been chairing a very ambitious project that is really trying to help the homeowners, and I use that word quite advisedly. We have 1,600 houses, probably another 900, apartments and condo units in the neighborhood, about 6,000 people, and so our focus has been, and I'll explain why it's homeowners in a moment, has been to help those folks both decarbonize their houses and also their personal transportation choices. Um, and so and we very quickly realized that it made sense not to limit this to the Harvard Village, even though our committee members are all here. So we wrote to 100 different community organizations across the city. 43 in the end said, yes, please do send us details about, upcoming webinars and discounts you negotiate on induction stoves, let's say, and we will share that, soon, or, if we can, with our members in contact. So ultimately, the goal is, we don't care how much carbon reduction there is in our own neighborhood. Obviously, we hope it'll be as much as possible, but if we can magnify, the impact of our efforts in communities across the city, and now we're reaching out to climate action groups outside of Toronto.
Mhm.
Um, so part of like the solar project 15 years ago, and even the high efficiency gas furnace project called HERO, now 10, 11 years ago, our strategy tip that we've evolved is to essentially negotiate with either manufacturers or retailers for discounts and then publicize those discounts because money talks. You know, even if it's a modest discount, consumers really pay attention. And the other thing we discovered in the solar project was that if a community organization obtains a discount for on something that's important, uh, consumers can also feel confident that we're you know, the products involved are quality products, that the companies that we're working with have good consumer. I mean, this is very sounds very consumerish, but it is, and that's okay. But people had to have confidence that that we had done the due diligence. We had investigated which were the better products versus the poorer ones, which ones are going to last well, and which service companies were going to provide good customer service. Because there's no point and we had, in fact, 15 years ago, there were community solar projects that worked with the cheapest equipment and the cheapest installers, and a lot of those solar panels are not on rooftops anymore.
Mhm.
And so we could see that problem emerging way back. Anyway, so that's the backdrop. I don't know if you want me to dive into the couple of bulk purchases we have going now, or do you want to go a different direction?
No, I think that's good. I think your last point about, just having, let's say, Energy Star label might not be sufficient, right? It doesn't necessarily give the consumer sufficient confidence that it will, work as specification. It's always really good to get word of mouth and get experience about how things actually work at home and the customer support that you will actually get. So yes, with that, I'd love to hear more about the bulk buy programs that you guys are advocating at the moment and how those are going.
Sure. I will go back though to the solar project because there was a great example. We put out a request for proposals. We interviewed about 17 companies that were installing solar water heaters, and then another 17 or so companies that were installing solar, PV or photoelectric systems on rooftops. And the question we asked of the guy doing had a small company doing the solar water heating, we said was if someone invited you to their house and they were very interested in having such a system, but you walked around and decided that it was going to be didn't make sense for the homeowner, what would you say to them? And he said, I would tell them it doesn't make sense, don't do it. And indeed, six of the first 10 houses that Aaron Goldwater of Goldwater Solar went to, he talked the homeowners out of getting solar water heating. So that's really the underscores the project, the approach that we were taking. So this time around, we started with induction stoves. Heat pumps are really the technology that can dramatically reduce carbon emissions in single family houses. But we were having a hard time trying to get the attention of Mitsubishi, who had the best heat pump on the market 2 years ago. And so we've sort of decided to shift gears and go to induction stoves, one of the three gas appliances that most people in the Harvard Village and across the city have in their homes. And we're surprised when Best Buy, big commercial realtor, actually, uh, a big commercial company came to us rather than a smaller independent retailer, and they provided. So the deal that we worked out with them and still continue with is that there's $300 to $800 discounts on 7 different induction stove ranges and smaller discounts on 4 induction cooktops. And but even better, they had a kind of white glove service where people would fill out a form on our website. It would go to Best Buy. Someone from Best Buy would call back and just sort of walk the person through the ordering process, but particularly to find out if the stove that they thought they want was really going to meet their needs best. And it wasn't necessarily upselling, it was more just making sure that it had the features they wanted, because even most models have different features that you can choose from. So kind of like a car, I suppose. So as a result, that was really great. And so we started with that, and it was interesting because induction stoves are kind of sell themselves. They're superior technology to start with. They boil water twice as fast. If you lift a pot off and you put your hand down on the stove, unlike a gas stove or something, you're not going to burn yourself. It's completely cool to the touch, even after once you take the pot away, it might be a little bit warm for a moment, but that's it. So they're safer, they're more efficient, and so it was a great technology to start with. And we subsequently negotiated with with Home Depot a relatively modest discount on the most efficient heat pump water heaters on the market, and that's where things lie at the moment. And so we've been so a few people in the neighborhood have got them installed, and now we're ready to start promoting them. We wanted to make sure that they were as quiet as advertised, and so forth. So those are a couple of the best of the bulk buys that we've started with, and we're now going to come back to heat pumps. Some houses have radiators and or in-floor heating, so we need heat pumps that work well with boilers. And then we also need, in the other half, the houses um, have ducts, heating sheet metal heating ducts that deliver the heat, and so we need heat pumps to work with those. So we're going to negotiate as many as four with four different companies for four different heat pumps that will work in all manner of houses. And
Mhm.
again, whatever we negotiate can be taken advantage of by people elsewhere in the city and in fact beyond. We're now seeing community groups outside of Toronto that are going to adopt and take on as their own the induction stove discounts, the heat pump water heater discounts in their own communities without people having to go through the Harvard Village website. So
Yeah.
we're excited about that.
Yeah, that's very exciting indeed. And how has the residents who have adopted these technologies, um, say about them? Have they given you any feedback, or yourself? Have you energy, has your energy bill come down?
Yeah, it's well the so yes, we've had lots of feedback. Swapping hot water tanks is pretty straightforward. Induction stoves, however, do require a learning curve. The apart from the fact you have to have a 40 amp electrical circuit. You can't plug your induction stove into a regular outlet. So that's expensive. And I had a neighbor down the street from me who spent $1,500, paid an electrician $1,500 to put a 40 amp circuit in so
Mhm.
she could plug in her new induction stove. That's not cheap. And in addition, once your stove is plugged in, then the next challenge is how many of your pots and pans will work.
Exactly, your
And
cookware has to be upgraded
exactly.
as well.
And so in our household, it was 75% of our cookware did no longer work.
Mhm.
And so at the moment, we have many fewer pots and pans than we used to, but that's okay. And so there's learning curves, and also they function differently. I mean, the fact that they boil water so fast is wonderful when you're trying to make coffee in the morning, but at the same time, um, you know, gas is very tactile. You can look and see exactly how much the burner is on, and you can judge whether it's going to simmer the soup that you're cooking or the meal that you're making. Induction is different. You're playing with mostly with digital controls, and you're not quite sure it takes a while to get to know the stove. So there's learning curves there, but that's kind of par for the course. Um, but yeah, the real savings are going to occur when people can say goodbye to one of the two utilities. And because both utilities, electric and gas, charge people for what's called storage fees, and distribution charges. So when there's a big incentive to go off gas in this case, not just the climate argument, but economically. And so our electrical bill has not gone up. We expect to see significant reductions in our gas bill. And we don't run our gas furnace very much. We're quite modest. We put it on a thermostat. It comes on at only for an hour in the morning, only for an hour late in the afternoon. It's off all night long, which is fine because you're underneath blankets. What do
Yes.
you need a furnace, you know? And so we've been pretty ruthless with. And then of course, if it's cold out and our house is not a warm house, yes, we'll override the thermostat and turn it on in the middle of the day, that kind of thing, once or twice even on cold days. But so we'll see savings eventually, but it's more that it's really more about carbon reduction. And uh, at our next meeting, we're discussing lawn signs that have been used in other communities to really help make much more visible the fact that there's a community-wide effort to reduce carbon emissions.
Mhm.
And we think that's going to really get people thinking way more about. It's easy to ignore a flyer that comes to your mailbox about something you're not really ready to think about. But once you pass day after day, and then you see more signs on more lawns of people who have made significant efforts to reduce their carbon footprint,
Mm.
then that gets you thinking about what you should be doing. And peer pressure really does work.
Mhm.
The challenge is, and maybe I know we want to talk about tenants, the challenge is that if you're only engaging homeowners who have some cash and can pay for these things and maybe get a rebate a year or two later from government,
Mhm.
you're already reducing the number of people in the community who can participate.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we want to shift gears a little bit and talk about that side of it. And
Yeah, so I do want to talk a bit about the cost because you mentioned your neighbor had to spend, a lot of money up front just to make the switch of the outlet. So what are some of the financial assistance, available for homeowners at the moment?
so the sad part is with induction stoves is there's zero subsidies. And although there's a federal greener homes program that provides rebates on things like heat pumps and solar panels and even heat pump water heaters, there's nothing for induction stoves. I think that's going to change soon. Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act south of the border is promising an $842 rebate for induction stoves.
Mhm.
But the real change, if I may take you on yet another tangent,
Yeah.
is that there are here in California where I sit at the moment, there are two startups that are now selling quite expensive induction stoves, but they're induction stoves with built-in batteries.
Mm.
And that's very exciting because those stoves don't need a special outlet. So you eliminate the electrical charges that my neighbor faced down the street. And secondly, whenever the power goes out, that battery in the bottom back part of the stove, it's not a lithium ion battery, by the way, it's a much safer lithium iron phosphate battery. That battery can keep the lights on and the laptops going for more than a day in a house. So that takes us into a whole different realm of energy storage, which is very exciting. It can really help make the electrical grid in our communities much more resilient.
Mhm.
So there's better things ahead. I'm sure that in Canada, because if the US goes forth with this rebate on induction stoves, we will have them very
Mhm.
soon in Canada.
Mhm.
But there are rebates on other things through this program called the Greener Homes Program. And the City of Toronto has a wonderful um, companion program that provides more modest rebates than the federal program. But you have to be able to afford to buy that, heat pump or heat pump water heater or induction stove, and then wait until
The rebate.
you're ready to apply for the rebates, and it may be a year before you get the money back. So there's at least half the homeowners in our neighborhood are not able to afford to do that. That's just,
Mm.
that's too difficult. Fortunately, the city has a wonderful home energy loan program that has very low they that has very low interest, and the feds have a program that is zero interest. And the nice thing about the city program is for homeowners is that it's if you amortize your expenses over 20 years,
Mhm.
the payments are low, but secondly, I'm probably not going to be in my house in 20 years, but the payments stay with the homeowner who buys the house and is enjoying the improvements that we've made, and therefore they quite rightly should be contributing, finishing off that mortgage. So we have some systems that are starting to work, but as I've alluded to, that still misses. We're not only missing half the homeowners
Yeah.
with our promotions, but secondly, we're missing 50% of the people in the neighborhood who rent either rent a space in a house or they rent in an apartment building or they're renting a condo unit or they're an owner of a condo unit but that doesn't have control over the heating and cooling and cooking appliances. So um, we've tried to address that in three ways with our project. One is initially we had hoped to really be promoting electric bikes and low carbon transportation. Uh, we had debated, we knew that at some point we were going to be promoting electric cars, but primarily used electric cars because they're so much cheaper and people downtown don't need the long range of that battery storage that newer vehicles offer. But the supply chains on both e-bikes and electric cars were so poor
Mhm.
that we, after negotiating with all the local bike shops, realized that they had too few bikes coming into their shops and more than enough customers for those e-bikes. So that was one of the key ways we thought we were going to be able to help support people who aren't homeowners but need cheaper personal transportation, and e-bikes are really a transformational technology. So that was unfortunate. We basically, said to our friends in the bike shops, "Look, we'll come back in 2 years and hope that things are better, and then we'll start again." The second thing is that um, we have been working in cahoots with a national nonprofit called Efficiency Canada,
Mhm.
and their main campaign is to lobby the federal government to do two things: provide supports for low-income homeowners, and
Mhm.
even in the Harvard Village, where houses might sell for, on average for $2 million, let's say, the vast majority of us, myself included, could not come close to buying the houses we live in.
Mhm.
We bought them a long time ago.
Right.
You know, we can pay the taxes, but not much more than that. So we're house poor, cash rich, or sorry, house rich, cash poor is a better way of putting it. But so what Efficiency Canada is doing is arguing and lobbying MPs, and we've joined in that effort several times in the last 2 years to say it's really important, federal government, that if you want to meet your climate targets, you've got to strengthen the low income home energy programs. And
Mhm.
they do exist. Enbridge runs one for people who are on gas, and a provincial organization called the IESO run a similar one for people who are largely dependent on electricity for their energy needs. But those programs are really poorly funded, and so what Efficiency Canada is seeking is much greater funding so that there could be greater supports provided to tenants and to even to landlords of multi-unit buildings to help, because if we're not seeing the energy transition occur in all those spaces that just mentioned, then we're not the federal and municipal governments are not going to anywhere meet their climate targets.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. I mean, one other consideration, I guess, cost-wise, is that sometimes economists have what they call the rebound effect. So even if you save costs in energy, you might spend it something else. But I think our focus here is really to talk about some of the energy efficiency and the carbon emission benefits that we'll get. Yeah. So you kind of touch on the tenant bit a bit, but I myself also live in a condo unit and
Mhm.
very little control. But I think we can advocate, right? Like always as tenant, we can advocate for other efficiencies. Windows being one of them, they kind of lose insulation over time and they result in a lot of heat loss. So maybe that's another area that we can look into. And so where do you see your net zero project going from here? You mentioned about, expanding beyond GTA. Would really want to hear about, what sort of collaboration you have with cities outside of GTA or even just within the GTHA.
Yep. So there's several things, but we've just started compiling, as I mentioned very briefly, probably before we started the recording, that we've reached out to climate action groups. We're just actually starting that process. We're compiling lists of climate action groups across the province, and what we're finding, of course, is that groups in rural areas with small cities, small towns, they tend to know the climate action groups that are next to them in the region next to them. So we're kind of building our list through collaboration that way. But what we're the motivation for them to to work with us is because we've done the negotiations, and Home Depot and Best Buy, for example, exist in every significant size city and across the province. So there's no reason why they can't be, induction stoves can't be taken up. Our promotion can't be, work just as well in Ottawa and Guelph, to cite two cities that have already, where there are groups that have already jumped in and said, yes, we want to do this. So um, so there are, what you've heard me talk about is induction stoves, heat pumps, and heat pump water heaters. And those are all, in a sense, appliances that one can swap in and swap out. You're absolutely right. Windows need to be replaced. Our buildings, whether they be apartment buildings or single family houses, need to be much better insulated.
Mhm.
The building you live in, the house that I live in Toronto, were built at a time when energy was super cheap, and so cladding the houses with new insulation is a really critically good strategy. Sadly, the economics for single family houses don't work well, but for apartment buildings,
Mhm.
uh, you know, the towers like the one you're in are actually it's really economic to
Mhm.
do exterior cladding and new siding on those buildings, and dramatically improve the comfort level inside the apartments in the winter, especially, and in the summer, um, and allow the much less energy to be spent heating and cooling. Uh, but in single family houses, we had hoped, for example, just to take you on that direction, we had hoped to organize a bulk purchase that would involve a contract. We would give a list of 20 houses, let's say, including mine, to a contractor and say, we want you to super insulate the outside walls of these houses. And, what kind of discount can you give if we give you 20 houses? And we thought we'd have no trouble signing up at least 60 houses, and we'd give 20 each to each contractor. And the savings for them is that they would bulk buy all the materials, the insulation, the air barriers, all that stuff, and um, and that they would be able to take the scaffolding down off one house midday after 3 or 4 days and take it 100 yards to the next house and put it up and keep going. And there's huge efficiencies for contractors in that kind of um, scenario. And the part of my house that needed exterior siding was relatively small. It's only 750 square feet, and uh, the best price that we got from contractors was $25,000
Wow.
plus another 10,000 for new siding. And when you look at the Greener Homes program and the rebate that uh, my wife and I would earn by going forth with that program was only $1,300 on a $35,000 investment. So we've since subsequently been lobbying Chrystia Freeland, our MP, to say, look, you've got to fix this part of the program because the rebate is just way, way too low for such an important part of the energy solution is super insulating buildings. That's key. And if we don't get the economics right, it's not going to happen. And we can swap out as many induction stoves and water heaters and so on, but people are still going to be in very uncomfortable houses that were never built for properly insulated for the heating and cooling that they now need to manage on a yearly basis. So that was a very big disappointment, and that we couldn't go forth with that kind of thing. And that's when you are kind of blazing a path that people haven't done before. You very quickly run up against roadblocks.
Mhm.
Supply chains on e-bikes.
Yeah.
Um, you know, problems where something is just way more expensive than it should be. And part of the reason why what we call exterior retrofits, the super insulating the outside of walls, which is a great approach because it doesn't disrupt people inside the
Mhm.
house or the apartment. The fact that it didn't work was a real setback, as mentioned already.
Mhm.
Um, but it was one that we'd hope would never have anticipated when we started investigating and trying to get quotes that that would be a problem.
Mhm.
So that's our role, to go down some of those rabbit holes, discover that there's real, you can't, you have to back your way out and go in a new direction. And but that's, we have some experience doing that, so that's our role for the time being.
Yeah, so according to you, there's no lack of interest of homeowners doing external cladding. It's just the cost being prohibitive,
Right.
right? Yeah, okay. And are you aware of other resident association or neighborhood groups that are doing similar things as Harbor Village?
Yes, there's a very active group in the East End. If we're, you rightly said, we're just west of the university, in the beginnings of the West End of Toronto. There's a group in the East End called the Pocket.
Mhm.
And sorry, there's a neighborhood, it's called the Pocket Community Association, I think, but they have the Pocket Change program, and they have 1,100 houses, a little bit newer houses than those here, and a little bit smaller houses. And they have a great approach. They've used it, whereas we've done the bulk purchase and then we widely disseminate it and hope that, people will participate that way. Their approach in the Pocket Change project has been to, you know, kind of find out who in their community is really willing to go 100% into decarbonization, and then they help them. So they call them change makers, and I think last year they had 10 change makers who were willing to completely go off gas, and they were the ones who gave us the idea of lawn signs, because in the Pocket neighborhood they have lawn signs in front of, two different lawn signs, one for people who are going completely off gas and have made that commitment and they're underway in that process, and a second lawn sign for people who aren't quite ready to do the whole thing, but have made major steps, like maybe they've changed their water tank and they're gotten rid of their gas stove. That would earn them a different lawn sign that says we're on the path to decarbonization. So we work closely with them, but because of their model, because we have two different models, ours kind of lent itself much more to collaborating with other community associations, and but they themselves have launched a new project that is going to provide sort of retrofit services to communities right across the city. And they've got some funding from the Atmospheric Fund, which is a wonderful agency in the GTHA. And they're waiting, they think they've got a lead on some federal funding from NRCan, and they hope to hear from that in another month or two. So we work closely. We share, we constantly share advice and tips and news with each other, and take advantage of each other's strategies.
That's great. Great to hear. And I guess the last question, and we'll wrap up after this, is what are your plans for 2023? What would be some of the quick, key wins that you would consider by end of the year?
Well, so on the one hand, if we could find 20 or 30 climate action groups outside of Toronto that take up and run with the discount programs that we've negotiated, we'll be very excited, because again, that just dramatically increases the carbon reductions. And at the end of the day, we don't care whether the carbon reductions are in small places like Coboconk, Ontario, or whether they're in Cabbagetown, downtown Toronto. And secondly, we hope to, the heat pumps are really the 75% of the carbon, eliminate 75% of the carbon emissions in most houses by replacing the gas furnace. So having an effective discount programs on heat pumps is really important. And similarly with solar panels, we've seen it's one thing to decarbonize, but if we aren't producing electricity in our downtown neighborhoods in much greater amounts, we aren't helping the grid, the older grids of older cities, to become more resilient. And so we're quite excited. Our surveys have showed that lots of people are very interested in solar, and as you know, solar is much cheaper than it used to be. So we're really excited about that. Those are the two big projects we're aiming to do, and in 2023.
Okay, that sounds very exciting. Exciting times ahead. So, well, thank you so much, Tim, for all the insights and your time today. And if you're listening until now, we thank you also for your time. And join us for the next interview series. And if you haven't checked us out, please look us up at impactnetzero.ca or our Facebook group. Similarly with the Net Zero Project Neighborhood on Facebook as well. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye
Yeah,
bye,
thank you.
Shuyi.
Bye-bye.